The question slipped from Jimin's lips at 2:17 a.m., trembling so softly that Jungkook almost thought he had imagined it. If I'm not perfect, would you still stay? Rain lashed against the apartment windows like impatient fingers, and the city lights beyond the glass blurred into streaks of silver and gold. The living room was dim except for the warm glow of a single lamp near the sofa, casting long shadows across the floor. Jimin stood barefoot in the middle of the room, his oversized sweater hanging from one shoulder, his hair damp from the shower he had taken after another sleepless night. He looked small, not physically. Jimin had always carried himself with elegance, with a beauty so effortless it made strangers turn their heads. But tonight his shoulders were hunched inward, as if he were trying to make himself disappear before the answer could hurt him. Jungkook sat frozen on the couch. In the 6 years they had loved each other, Jimin had asked many things. Do you think this song sounds okay? Am I too much? Will you be home early? Do you still love me? But never this, never with eyes so wide and fragile as though his entire heart rested on the edge of Jungkook's response. Jungkook set down the mug in his hand. The tea inside had long gone cold. What do you mean? He asked quietly. Jimin laughed, but it was not the kind of laugh that carried warmth. It was sharp and brittle, like glass threatening to crack. I mean, he said, if one day you wake up and realize I'm not everything you thought I was, if I'm difficult, if I'm insecure, if I can't always smile for you, if I'm broken in ways I don't know how to fix, his voice faltered. Would you still stay? The silence that followed felt heavier than thunder. Jungkook rose slowly. His heart ached because he knew exactly where this was coming from. For weeks Jimin had been slipping through invisible cracks. He smiled in public, laughed with friends, and performed with flawless grace. But at night, when the world grew quiet, his doubts became louder. It had started after a magazine interview where the reporter casually asked Jimin how he managed to remain so perfect. Everyone laughed, Jimin laughed too, but Jungkook saw the flicker in his eyes. Since then, Jimin had become hyper-aware of every flaw. He stared too long into mirrors. He reread criticism online until dawn. He apologized for things that needed no apology. Sorry I'm clingy, sorry I'm emotional, sorry I look tired, sorry I ruined your mood. Each apology was a plea disguised as politeness. Please don't leave. Jungkook crossed the room until only inches separated them. Jimin's lower lip trembled, but he stubbornly kept his gaze lifted. I need you to tell me the truth, Jimin whispered. Not what sounds nice. Jungkook reached up and cupped Jimin's face in both hands. His skin was warm and damp. Park Jimin, he said, voice firm enough to cut through every fear in the room. I never fell in love with perfection. Jimin blinked. Jungkook continued. I fell in love with the way you steal all the blankets and pretend you don't. I fell in love with how you pout when your dumplings are too hot. I fell in love with your laugh when you snort and get embarrassed. I fell in love with the way you cry during movies and deny it even when your cheeks are wet. A tear slipped down Jimin's face. Jungkook brushed it away with his thumb. I fell in love with your fears, he whispered. Your scars, your overthinking, your stubbornness, your kindness that makes you carry everyone else's pain. His own voice shook now. And if you stopped smiling tomorrow, if you couldn't dance, if you forgot how to be strong, I would still stay. Jimin inhaled sharply. Jungkook pressed his forehead against Jimin's. I would stay when you are angry, I would stay when you are silent, I would stay when you don't know how to love yourself. His fingers trembled. I would stay until you remember what I see when I look at you. Jimin's tears came faster. Because to me, Jungkook said, you were never meant to be perfect, you were only meant to be you. Words shattered something inside Jimin. A sob escaped him before he could stop it. He collapsed against Jungkook, gripping the back of his shirt with desperate hands, as if he had been holding himself together for too long and could no longer bear the weight. Jungkook held him tightly. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, Jimin cried with his face buried against Jungkook's shoulder, his tears soaking the cotton fabric. He cried for the years spent believing he had to earn love by being flawless. He cried for every cruel thought he had whispered to his reflection. He cried for the exhausted version of himself who had forgotten that love was not a reward for perfection. Jungkook did not rush him, he simply held him. One hand stroked through his damp hair, the other rested over his heart. I'm here, he murmured again and again. I'm here, past, or perhaps hours. Eventually, Jimin's sobs softened into shaky breaths. I'm scared, he admitted, voice muffled against Jungkook's chest. I know. If one day I become too much, Jungkook leaned back just enough to look into his eyes, then I'll love every part of your too much. Let out a watery laugh. What if I push you away? I'll wait nearby until you're ready to let me in. If I stop believing you, Jungkook kissed his forehead, then I'll tell you again, every day if I have to. Stared at him as though seeing him for the first time. The sincerity in Jungkook's eyes was overwhelming. There was no hesitation, no hidden uncertainty, only the steady certainty of someone who had already made his choice. And Jungkook had chosen him, not the polished version the world admired, not the charming smile, not the perfect performances. Him, the flawed, frightened, deeply human man who stood trembling in his arms. Jimin's fingers loosened their desperate grip and slid upward until they rested over Jungkook's heartbeat. It was strong, steady, real. "You really mean it," he whispered. Jungkook smiled softly. "With everything I am." Jimin closed his eyes. For the first time in weeks, the noise in his mind began to quiet, not because all his insecurities vanished, not because he suddenly believed he was flawless, but because he understood something more important. He did not need to be flawless to be loved. The storm outside gradually eased. Rain softened to a whisper against the windows. The apartment filled with a peaceful stillness. Jungkook led Jimin to the couch. They curled together beneath a blanket, Jimin tucked against Jungkook's chest, their legs tangled. The lamp still glowed beside them, painting the room in amber light. Jimin listened to Jungkook's heartbeat. Each beat seemed to say the same thing: "Stay, stay, stay." "Thank you," Jimin murmured. Jungkook kissed his hair. "For what?" "For loving me when I forget how." Jungkook tightened his arms around him. "That's what we do." Jimin smiled, small but genuine. His eyes grew heavy before sleep claimed him. He whispered one last question. "What if I ask you this again?" Jungkook's answer came without hesitation. "I'll give you the same answer for the rest of my life." Fell asleep to those words, and for the first time in a long time he dreamed not of losing the person he loved, but of waking up beside him. Morning sunlight spilled through the curtains in soft golden beams. Jimin stirred slowly. Jungkook was still there, one arm wrapped around his waist, one hand resting over his heart. Exactly where he had promised to stay. Morning arrived quietly, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and fresh coffee. Jimin woke to the soft rhythm of Jungkook's breathing against the back of his neck. For a few seconds he remained still, suspended between sleep and consciousness. Sunlight filtered through the curtains in warm ribbons, painting the living room in gold. The storm had passed. The city outside glittered as if the world itself had been washed clean overnight, and Jungkook was still there. His arm remained draped securely around Jimin's waist, his fingers curled loosely over Jimin's heartbeat exactly as they had been hours before. Jimin swallowed hard. A part of him had expected to wake up alone, not because Jungkook had ever given him reason to doubt, but because fear had a way of creating its own reality. It whispered that love was temporary, that affection had limits, that one day everyone would discover he was too flawed to keep. But this morning those whispers sounded quieter. Jimin carefully turned in Jungkook's embrace. Jungkook was still asleep, his dark hair falling across his forehead, his lips slightly parted. Without the confidence he wore in public, he looked younger, softer, heartbreakingly vulnerable. Jimin studied him with a tenderness that made his chest ache. This man had stayed, not with grand speeches before crowds, not with dramatic promises under fireworks. He had stayed in the most meaningful way possible, by remaining when Jimin was afraid to be seen. Jimin reached up and brushed a lock of hair from Jungkook's eyes. Jungkook stirred almost instantly. His lashes fluttered open, and the moment he saw Jimin, his sleepy expression transformed into a gentle smile. "Good morning." The two words were rough with sleep, but they carried the same unwavering certainty as everything he had said the night before. Jimin's throat tightened. "Good morning." Jungkook searched his face. "How do you feel?" Jimin considered the question honestly. He did not feel cured. The insecurities were still there, hidden in the corners of his mind like shadows waiting for nightfall, but they no longer felt all-powerful. "I feel," he hesitated. "Lighter." Jungkook's smile deepened. "That's a good start." Looked down, tracing small circles on Jungkook's shirt. "I'm sorry." Jungkook frowned. "For what?" "For asking you that." Jimin's voice was barely above a whisper. "For doubting you." Jungkook gently lifted Jimin's chin. "Apologize for being afraid." Jimin blinked. "Everyone needs reassurance sometimes," Jungkook said. "Even you." Jimin's eyes burned unexpectedly. He nodded. Jungkook leaned forward and kissed him slowly. The kiss was soft and deliberate, carrying no urgency, only warmth, patience, and a quiet promise that still lingered between them. When they pulled apart, Jimin rested his forehead against Jungkook's shoulder. "I don't know why I keep thinking you'll leave." Wrapped both arms around him. "Because somewhere along the way you learned that love has conditions." Jimin stiffened. The words struck with painful accuracy. Fragments of old memories surfaced. Adults who praised him only when he excelled. Friends who drifted away when he became too emotional. Relationships that demanded he be easier, calmer, prettier, stronger. Jimin had spent years trying to become whatever people needed in order to be worthy of staying. And now, even with Jungkook, that fear still lingered. "What if I never completely stop feeling this way?" he asked. Jungkook pressed a kiss to his temple. "Then we'll face it together." The simplicity of the answer undid him. Jimin laughed softly through gathering tears. "You always make it sound so easy." Grinned. "It's not easy." He tightened his embrace. "It's just worth it." Jimin closed his eyes. The truth settled inside him with surprising gentleness. Love was not the absence of fear, it was the decision to remain despite it. Later that morning they moved to the kitchen. Jungkook prepared breakfast while humming under his breath. still wearing the same black t-shirt from the night before. Jimin sat on the counter, wrapped in a blanket, watching him crack eggs with practiced ease. The domestic normalcy felt almost surreal. After such a vulnerable night, the world had not changed dramatically. The sky was still blue, coffee still brewed, Jungkook still burned the first slice of toast because he was too distracted talking. And perhaps that was what made love so extraordinary. It transformed life not through grand miracles but through consistency. Jungkook glanced over his shoulder. "Why are you staring at me like that?" Jimin smiled, memorizing this. You cooking breakfast and pretending you're not secretly checking if I'm okay every 5 seconds." Jungkook laughed. "I am absolutely checking every 5 seconds." Jimin's smile widened. "I know." Jungkook plated the food and joined him at the small kitchen table. For a while they ate in comfortable silence, then Jimin spoke. "There's something I've never told you." Set down his fork immediately, Jimin drew in a shaky breath. "Sometimes when you don't answer my messages right away, I imagine the worst." Jungkook listened without interruption. "I think maybe you're tired of me or that you've realized you could do better." He twisted his fingers together. "I know it sounds irrational." "It sounds human," Jungkook said. Jimin looked up. Jungkook reached across the table and took his hands. "You don't have to hide these things from me. I don't want to burden you." Jungkook squeezed his fingers. "Loving you is not a burden." The words landed with quiet force. Jimin felt tears gathering again, but this time they were different, not born from fear, born from relief. He exhaled slowly. "I want to believe that." Leaned forward. "Then let me keep showing you." Nodded. And for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future in which healing was not about becoming perfect, but about learning to trust the love that had already chosen him. That evening they walked through the city hand in hand. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet pavement and blooming flowers from nearby trees. Cars passed in glowing streams of light. Somewhere in the distance, a street musician played a soft melody on the guitar. Jimin's fingers tightened around Jungkook's. Jungkook glanced at him. "What is it?" Jimin looked ahead, his eyes reflecting the city lights. "I'm still scared." Jungkook lifted their joined hands and kissed Jimin's knuckles. "I know," turned to him. "But I think," his voice trembled with quiet wonder. "I think I'm starting to believe you." Smiled. "That's all I need." They continued walking beneath the evening sky, no dramatic declarations, no promises carved in stone, only two hearts moving forward together, imperfect and uncertain but willing. And sometimes that willingness was the most powerful form of love. That night when they returned home, Jimin stood before the bathroom mirror. For a moment his old instincts returned. He noticed the tiredness beneath his eyes, the lingering traces of insecurity, the flaws he knew too well. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Jungkook appeared in the reflection and wrapped his arms around Jimin's waist. Their eyes met in the mirror. For the first time, Jimin did not focus solely on what he thought was wrong. He saw what Jungkook saw, someone worthy of tenderness, someone worth staying for. Jimin leaned back into his embrace. "I'm not perfect," he whispered. Jungkook kissed his shoulder. "I know." Jimin's lips curved. "And you're still here." Held him tighter. Always. This time Jimin believed him.
Weeks passed, not with dramatic transformations, but with small and sacred changes that quietly reshaped Jimin's heart. Healing, Jimin discovered, did not arrive like sunlight bursting through storm clouds. It came in ordinary moments, in the way Jungkook kissed his forehead before leaving for work, in the text messages that appeared throughout the day. "Have you eaten? Thinking of you. Come home soon." In the gentle pressure of Jungkook's hand finding his in crowded rooms, as if reminding him that no matter how many people surrounded them, they belonged to each other. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Jimin began to breathe easier. There were still difficult nights. Sometimes he woke from dreams in which Jungkook walked away without looking back. Sometimes he stared too long at his reflection, cataloguing flaws only he could see. Sometimes a delayed reply or a distracted expression sent old fears surging through his chest. But now, instead of hiding, Jimin spoke. "Feeling insecure today. I need reassurance. I know it doesn't make sense, but I'm scared." Each confession felt like stepping onto thin ice, and each time Jungkook met him with the same unwavering steadiness. "I'm here. Love you. Not going anywhere." Those words did not erase the fear immediately, but they gave Jimin something stronger than certainty. They gave him trust. One evening in early autumn, they returned to the apartment after a long day. The city outside glowed amber and crimson, leaves scattered across the sidewalks like fragments of sunset. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of vanilla candles and laundry detergent. Jimin kicked off his shoes and collapsed onto the couch with a groan. Jungkook laughed from the kitchen. Tired. Emotionally, physically, spiritually. Jungkook appeared with 2 mugs of hot chocolate crowned with melting marshmallows. Jimin accepted one gratefully. They sat shoulder to shoulder in comfortable silence. Then Jungkook cleared his throat. "Can I ask you something?" Jimin turned toward him. Of course. Jungkook seemed oddly nervous. He set his mug down on the coffee table and rubbed his palms against his jeans. Jimin blinked. The sight of confident, composed Jungkook looking uncertain sent a ripple of concern through him. What is it? Jungkook inhaled slowly. Do you remember what you asked me that night? Jimin's heart skipped. If I'm not perfect, would you still stay? Jungkook nodded. I've been thinking about it a lot. Jimin's chest tightened. 1,000 anxious thoughts collided inside him. Was Jungkook reconsidering? Had something changed? Jungkook reached for his hands before fear could take over. Jimin, look at me. Their eyes met. Jungkook's expression was soft but deeply serious. I meant every word I said. Exhaled shakily, Jungkook continued. But there's something I didn't tell you. Swallowed. What is it? Jungkook's thumb brushed over his knuckles. I'm not perfect either. Stared, Jungkook gave a small, vulnerable smile. I get scared too. The confession hung between them. Jimin's eyes widened. You do? Jungkook nodded. I worry that I'll fail you, that there will be days when I don't know the right thing to say. I worry that my own flaws will hurt you. Voice softened. I worry that one day you'll look at me and realize I'm not as strong as you thought. Jimin's throat tightened. For so long he had viewed Jungkook as immovable, someone who never doubted, never wavered. But here he was, trembling with his own fears. Jungkook took a breath. I need to ask you something too. Jimin's eyes filled instantly. Jungkook's voice was barely above a whisper. If I'm not perfect, will you still stay? Tears spilled down Jimin's cheeks before he could answer. A laugh escaped him, shaky and overwhelmed. He cupped Jungkook's face with both hands, mirroring the gesture that had once saved him. Jeon Jungkook, he said through tears, I never loved you because you were perfect. Jungkook's lips parted. Jimin smiled, tears shimmering in his eyes. I love the way you overthink before buying groceries. I love how you sing in the shower and forget half the lyrics. I love your fears, your stubbornness, your tenderness. He pressed their foreheads together. I love the parts of you that are still learning. Jungkook's eyes grew wet. Jimin's voice steadied. If you are tired, I will stay. He kissed Jungkook's trembling lips. If you are afraid, I will stay. Kiss. If you lose your way, I will stay. His fingers brushed away Jungkook's tears. If you forget your worth, I will remind you every day for the rest of my life. Let out a broken sob and pulled Jimin into his arms. They held each other tightly, each discovering that love was not a one-sided promise. It was a mutual surrender, a quiet vow to remain through imperfections, fears, and the unglamorous work of healing. Much later, after tears had dried and mugs sat abandoned on the coffee table, Jungkook reached into his pocket. Jimin frowned. What are you doing? Jungkook drew out a small velvet box. The room seemed to stop breathing. Jimin's hands flew to his mouth. Jungkook shifted to one knee on the rug, his eyes shining with emotion. I was going to wait for the perfect moment, he admitted, laughing softly. But now I realize there is no such thing. Opened the box. Inside, a simple silver ring caught the lamplight. Jungkook looked up, tears gathering again. I don't want a perfect love. His voice trembled. I want a real one, with all our fears and flaws and messy nights. He took Jimin's shaking hand. So Park Jimin. Jimin was already crying too hard to speak. Jungkook smiled through tears. Will you stay with me for the rest of our imperfect lives? Jimin dropped to his knees before him. He sobbed. Yes, I will stay. Slid the ring onto his finger. It fit perfectly, not because it was flawless, but because it was made with him in mind. Jimin threw his arms around him and they collapsed onto the rug in laughter and tears. Outside, the city continued to move. Cars passed, wind stirred the trees, stars emerged one by one. And inside their little apartment, two imperfect hearts chose each other again. Years later, Jimin would still sometimes ask, in quiet moments when old fears resurfaced, would you still stay? And whether they were tangled in sheets before dawn, standing in the kitchen with flour on their hands, or growing older with silver beginning to thread through their hair, Jungkook always gave the same answer. He kissed Jimin's forehead, held his hand, looked into his eyes with unwavering love and said, always. The end, perfection, was never what kept them together. It was honesty, patience, the courage to be fully seen, and the simple, extraordinary choice to stay. The wedding took place on a spring afternoon when the cherry blossoms drifted through the air like pale pink snow. Jimin stood at the end of the aisle with trembling hands and tears already gathering in his eyes. The garden was quiet except for the rustle of leaves and the soft music floating from a nearby string quartet. Their closest friends and family sat beneath white canopies, smiling through tears as they watched Jungkook appear between rows of blooming trees. For a moment, Jimin forgot to breathe. Jungkook wore a black suit tailored perfectly to his frame, but it was not the elegance of his appearance that made Jimin's chest ache. It was the expression on his face. The same expression Jimin had seen on the night he asked the question that changed everything. Steady, certain, full of love, Jungkook's eyes never left his, By the time he reached the altar, both of them were crying openly. Jimin laughed shakily. "You promised not to cry before me," wiped his eyes and grinned. "You started first." The guests laughed softly, the sound warm and affectionate. When it was time to exchange vows, Jimin unfolded a piece of paper with trembling fingers. He looked at the words he had rewritten countless times, but the moment he saw Jungkook's tearful smile, he set the paper aside. "I had something prepared," he said, his voice unsteady, "but none of it feels as important as this." He took a shaky breath. "There was a time when I thought love had to be earned." His eyes filled again. "I thought if I was beautiful enough, kind enough, strong enough, maybe someone would stay." Jungkook's lower lip trembled. Jimin stepped closer. "Then you loved me on the nights when I was afraid. You stayed when I doubted myself. You taught me that I didn't need to be perfect to deserve love." Spilled freely now. "Today I make you the same promise you made me." He took Jungkook's hands. "When you are tired, I will stay." A tear slipped down Jungkook's cheek. "When you are uncertain, I will stay." Smiled through tears. "When life is beautiful, I will stay. And when life is painful and messy and frightening, I will stay." His voice softened to a whisper. "I will choose you in every version of our lives." Jungkook could barely speak when his turn came. He unfolded his own vows, stared at the page for a few seconds, then laughed and folded it again. "I can't read this," he admitted, wiping his eyes. The guests chuckled. Jungkook held Jimin's hands tighter. "You asked me once if I would stay if you weren't perfect." He smiled. "That was the easiest question anyone has ever asked me." Jimin's tears fell harder. Jungkook continued. "You are the bravest person I know, not because you never feel fear but because you let yourself be loved despite it." His voice broke. "You trusted me with your heart, and that is the greatest honor of my life." Lifted Jimin's left hand where the engagement ring still gleamed. "I promise to keep choosing you, in every ordinary morning, in every difficult night, in every season of who we become." He kissed Jimin's knuckles. "If you ask me 1,000 more times whether I'll stay," Jungkook smiled through tears, "answer will always be yes." Was not a dry eye in the garden. When they exchanged rings, Jimin's hands shook so badly that Jungkook had to guide his fingers. They laughed through tears. Then the officiant spoke the words both of them had dreamed of hearing. "You may kiss your husband." Surged forward before the sentence was finished. Their kiss was tender, tearful, and full of everything they had survived to reach this moment. The guests erupted in applause. Cherry blossoms swirled around them in the spring wind. And for the first time in his life, Jimin felt entirely safe. Years passed, their love changed as all real love does. It grew quieter in some ways, deeper in others. There were still arguments about unwashed dishes and forgotten errands. There were nights when stress made them short-tempered. There were losses, disappointments, and moments when the world felt unbearably heavy. But they never stopped choosing each other. Jimin still danced around the kitchen while cooking. Jungkook still burned toast when distracted. They still fell asleep tangled together, one hand always reaching for the other in the dark. On difficult nights, Jimin sometimes whispered the old question, "Would you still stay?" By then, Jungkook no longer answered with words alone. He would kiss the corner of Jimin's eye, wrap his arms around him, rest his palm over Jimin's heart, and stay. When they were older, silver threaded through their hair and fine lines softened their faces. One autumn evening, they sat side by side on the porch of their home, wrapped in blankets as golden leaves drifted across the yard. Jimin rested his head on Jungkook's shoulder. Their hands, weathered by time, remained intertwined. The sunset painted the sky in amber and rose. After a long silence, Jimin smiled. "You know," he said, "I'm still not perfect." Turned to him, eyes warm with decades of devotion. "I know." Looked at the man who had loved every version of him, the young dreamer, the frightened soul, the husband, the agging partner whose heart still raced at the sight of him. "And you're still here." Jungkook kissed his forehead just as he had done countless times before. "Always." Jimin closed his eyes. The words settled over him like home. And in that quiet moment, with autumn leaves dancing around them and the person he loved beside him, Jimin finally understood. The most beautiful love stories were never about perfect people. They were about imperfect hearts brave enough to ask vulnerable questions, and about the extraordinary souls who answered by staying. Winter came gently that year. The first snow fell just after midnight, covering the garden in a thin layer of silver. Moonlight rested on the branches, and the world outside their bedroom window looked hushed and untouched, as if time itself had paused to let them breathe. Jimin woke before dawn. For a moment he lay still beneath the blankets, listening to the soft crackle of the fireplace and the steady breathing beside him. Jungkook, even after decades, Jimin never grew used to the quiet miracle of opening his eyes and finding him there. The years had softened them both. Jimin's hair was streaked with silver, his smile lined with the traces of laughter and tears. Jungkook's hands were stronger and more weathered now. but they still reached for Jimin instinctively, even in sleep. As if his body had memorized a promise his heart made long ago, stay. Jimin turned onto his side and studied the man he loved. Jungkook's eyelashes rested against his cheeks. His lips were relaxed, no longer carrying the determined tension of youth. Time had changed his face, but not the tenderness that lived in it. Jimin brushed his fingertips along Jungkook's hand. The wedding band gleamed softly in the firelight. A sudden swell of emotion tightened his chest. He thought of the frightened young man he used to be, the one who stood in a rain-soaked apartment and asked whether love could survive imperfection. He wished he could go back and whisper to that version of himself, "You will be loved for exactly who you are. You will be held through every fear, and one day the question that once haunted you will become the answer that defines your life." Jungkook stirred. His eyes opened slowly, and despite the years between them, his first expression was the same as it had always been, warm, certain, home. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. Jimin smiled. "Because I still can't believe you stayed." Jungkook's eyes softened. He reached out and tucked a silver strand behind Jimin's ear. "I told you I would." Jimin's throat tightened. "I know." Jungkook pulled him closer until they were wrapped around each other beneath the blankets. Outside, snow drifted silently to the ground. Inside, the world narrowed to heartbeats and warmth. After a while, Jimin whispered, "Do you regret anything?" Jungkook considered the question, then he shook his head. "Not one day with you." Filled Jimin's eyes. Even now, after all this time, Jungkook's words still had the power to reach the deepest parts of him. Jimin pressed a trembling kiss to his lips when they pulled apart. Jungkook smiled. "What about you?" Jimin laughed softly through tears. "I regret all the years I thought I had to be perfect before I deserved this." Jungkook kissed the tears from his cheeks. "You found your way." "No," Jimin said, resting his forehead against his husband's. "You held the light until I did." They stayed in bed until the sun rose fully. Later, they made breakfast together. Jimin stirred pancake batter while Jungkook sliced strawberries. They moved around the kitchen with the ease of two people who had shared a lifetime of mornings. At one point, Jungkook came up behind him and wrapped his arms around his waist. Jimin leaned back against his chest, smiling. "We're going to burn the pancakes." Jungkook kissed his neck. "Then we'll eat burnt pancakes." Jimin laughed. The sound filled the kitchen, warm and bright. There was no grand event that day, no milestone, no dramatic declaration. Only snow outside the windows, a quiet home, and two men growing older in the ordinary miracle they had built together. That evening they sat by the fireplace. Photo albums lay open on the rug. There were pictures of their wedding beneath cherry blossoms, vacations to places they once dreamed of seeing, candid moments of laughter, and blurred snapshots that captured nothing extraordinary, except the joy of being together. Jimin held one photograph taken shortly after their engagement. In it they were young and tearful, smiling as though they had discovered something precious. He traced the image with his fingertips. "We were so scared." Jungkook nodded. "We stayed anyway." Looked at him. That made all the difference. Deepened, the fire burned lower. Jimin curled against Jungkook's side beneath a shared blanket. His eyes grew heavy. Before sleep claimed him, he whispered the question that had begun their story. "If I'm not perfect." Jungkook did not let him finish. He turned, cupped Jimin's face with gentle hands, and kissed him with the same devotion he had carried for a lifetime. Then he smiled. "Love, we were never meant to be perfect." Touched their wedding rings. "We were meant to stay." Jimin closed his eyes, peace settling into every corner of his heart. As snow fell beyond the windows and the fire glowed softly in the darkness, he drifted to sleep in the arms of the man who had answered his greatest fear with a lifetime of love. And in the quiet of that winter night, with decades of shared mornings and tender promises behind them, Jimin understood at last that perfection was never the destination. Love was. And love in its truest form was simply this: two imperfect hearts, one unwavering promise, and the extraordinary grace of staying.
Spring returned one final time. The cherry trees outside their home bloomed in clouds of pale pink, just as they had on the day they promised forever to one another. Petals drifted across the garden path and gathered on the porch where Jimin and Jungkook had spent countless evenings watching the sky change colors. By then their hair had turned almost completely silver, their steps were slower, their hands were marked by time. But when Jimin looked at Jungkook, he still saw the same pair of bright eyes that had once looked at him in a rain-soaked apartment and answered his most vulnerable question without hesitation. Always, one warm afternoon they sat together beneath the cherry blossoms. Jimin leaned against Jungkook's shoulder, wrapped in a soft cardigan. The air smelled of fresh grass and flowers, and birds sang somewhere in the branches above them. Neither spoke for a long while. They no longer needed many words. Their silence had become its own language. Jimin traced the lines on Jungkook's hand with gentle fingertips. "Do you remember that night?" he asked. Jungkook smiled. "The storm." Jimin nodded. "I thought my heart would break if you said no." turned and pressed a kiss to his temple. I never had another answer, shimmered in Jimin's eyes, but they were peaceful tears now. He looked up at the blossoms drifting overhead. I spent so much of my life trying to become someone worthy of love. His voice was soft. And all along you were teaching me that I already was. Jungkook cupped his face with both hands just as he had done when they were young. You always were. Jimin closed his eyes and let the words settle inside him one last time. They stayed there until the sun began to set, bathing the garden in amber light. When the evening grew cooler, Jungkook helped Jimin inside. They moved slowly through the familiar house they had filled with decades of laughter, tears, music, and quiet mornings. Photographs lined the walls. Memories lived in every room. In the bedroom, Jimin lay down and reached for Jungkook's hand. Jungkook climbed in beside him, wrapping an arm around his waist. The gesture was so familiar that it felt eternal. Jimin rested his head over Jungkook's heart. The beat beneath his ear was steady. Beloved, safe home. Jimin's breathing grew softer. I'm tired, he whispered. Jungkook kissed his forehead. I'm here. Smiled, the same small, grateful smile Jungkook had fallen in love with so many years ago. His eyes fluttered. Jungkook, yes, my love. Jimin's voice was barely audible. If I'm not perfect, Jungkook held him closer. You never had to be. A tear slipped down Jimin's cheek and you still stayed, pressed his lips to Jimin's hair. Always. Were the last words Jimin heard. He exhaled slowly, peacefully, wrapped in the arms that had held him through every fear and every joy. And with Jungkook's heartbeat beneath his cheek, he drifted away like a blossom carried by the spring wind, quietly, gently, loved. For a long time, Jungkook did not move. He held Jimin exactly as he had promised. Tears streamed silently down his face, but his expression remained tender. He kissed Jimin's forehead and whispered through trembling lips, "Thank you for staying too." Years later, when people asked Jungkook what the greatest love of his life had taught him, he would smile with tears in his eyes. He would say that love was not perfection, it was not certainty, it was not a life without fear. Love was the courage to reveal every fragile part of yourself and trust someone to remain. It was two imperfect hearts choosing one another over and over through every season of life. And when the time came, love was keeping your promise until the very end. In the spring of his own final year, Jungkook returned to the garden where cherry blossoms still bloomed. He sat beneath the same tree where they had once watched petals fall. The breeze was soft. The sky glowed gold. Jungkook closed his eyes and smiled. At last he could almost hear Jimin's laughter carried on the wind. He whispered into the evening, "I'm coming home." When his eyes closed for the final time, the world seemed to fill with petals and light. Somewhere beyond pain and time, Jimin was waiting, young and radiant, eyes shining, arms open. Jungkook walked toward him without hesitation, and together, hand in hand, they stepped into forever. Because in the end, the answer to Jimin's question never changed. If I'm not perfect, would you still stay? Yes. In every storm, in every ordinary morning, in every wrinkle and every tear, in life, in death, and in the eternity that followed, always.